You've probably heard it 100 times. Just go no contact, block them, delete their number, stop responding, move on. And if you're able to do that, no contact can absolutely be a powerful tool. But what if you can't? What if this person is your ex and you share children? What if it's your mother or father, a sibling, a coworker, someone you have to see at family gatherings, someone you have to communicate with because your lives are still connected in some way? What if you can't just disappear from their life? Does that mean you're stuck? Does that mean you'll never heal? No. And I want you to hear this because I think sometimes we put so much pressure on ourselves to achieve this perfect version of healing where we've completely removed the person from our life. But sometimes healing doesn't begin when the person disappears. Sometimes healing begins when you stop allowing that person to control what happens inside of you. And that's what we're going to talk about today, because you may not be able to control whether this person is in your life, but you can learn how much access they have to your peace. Hi guys, welcome back to Let's Heal Together. If you're new here, I'm Amelia, and this channel is about healing from toxic and emotionally abusive relationships, rebuilding your self-worth, creating healthier boundaries, and learning how to come back to yourself after you've spent too much time surviving someone else's behavior. And if that's where you are right now, I'm really glad you're here, because today we're talking about something I think a lot of people need to hear. You don't need no contact in order to begin healing. You need something else. You need to start creating emotional distance. And that can look very different from physical distance. Part 1, stop making your healing dependent on their behavior. One of the hardest things after narcissistic or emotionally abusive relationships is realizing how much of your emotional life has become connected to what this other person does. You're anxious, they say something cruel, you replay it for 3 hours, they suddenly act nice. Now you're wondering what it means, they apologize, you start hoping maybe things will finally be different, they hurt you again, and suddenly you're back in the cycle. And eventually you realize, I don't want this person to have this much power over me anymore. But here's the problem. A lot of us try to get that power back by trying to change the other person. We want them to understand what they did. We want them to admit they hurt us. We want an apology. We want accountability. We want them to finally see the situation from our perspective. And honestly, I understand that, because when somebody hurts you, there's something inside of you that says, if I could just make them understand, maybe I could finally let this go. But healing doesn't require their understanding, and it doesn't require their agreement. And you don't need them to admit that they were wrong before you are allowed to move forward. Because if your healing depends on another person finally becoming self-aware, you've given them control over your healing, and you don't need to do that anymore. Part 2, accept who they are. This is probably one of the hardest things to accept. Sometimes the person who hurt you is simply not going to become the person you hoped they would be. And acceptance does not mean approval. It doesn't mean what they did was okay. It doesn't mean I deserve this. It doesn't mean I have to keep letting them treat me this way. Acceptance simply means I am no longer fighting reality. This is who this person is. This is what they have shown me. Sometimes we're exhausted not because we're still dealing with the person, but because we're still fighting with the idea of who we desperately wish they would become. And there is so much freedom in saying, I don't have to make you understand me anymore. I don't have to prove what happened. I don't have to expose you. I don't have to make you feel guilty. I don't have to make you change. I just have to decide what I'm going to do with what you've shown me. That is where your power starts coming back. Part 3, emotional distance. So if you can't physically go no contact, what can you do? You start practicing emotional distance. And emotional distance doesn't mean becoming cold. It doesn't mean becoming cruel. And it doesn't mean pretending you don't have feelings. It means learning how to stop making every interaction with this person an emotional event. For example, they make a passive-aggressive comment. Instead of spending the next 6 hours wondering, why would they say that? You recognize, like, that was a passive-aggressive comment. Part 4, know your triggers before you walk into the situation. This is where self-awareness becomes incredibly important. If you know you have to interact with this person, don't walk into the interaction hoping they'll behave differently. Walk in knowing yourself. Ask, What does this person usually do that triggers me? Do they criticize you? Do they interrupt you? Do they try to make you feel guilty? Do they bring up the past? Do they intentionally misunderstand you? Do they bait you into defending yourself? Do they suddenly become charming when other people are around? Know your patterns. Because when you know what tends to happen, you're no longer walking into the situation completely unprepared. You're walking in with awareness. You can literally say to yourself, I know what they're doing. And that one sentence can change the entire interaction. Because instead of what's wrong with me, you start thinking, I recognize this pattern. And when you recognize the pattern, you have a choice. Here's another one. You do not have to explain your boundary 17 different ways. Sometimes people who have been emotionally manipulated become incredible over-explainers. We think, if I just explain it a little better, they'll finally understand. And so we write the long text, we explain our feelings, we give examples, we defend ourselves, we explain why we're hurt, we explain why their behavior isn't okay, and then they argue with every single sentence. Now you're having a 3-hour conversation about something that should have required 3 words. I'm not discussing this, or I'm going to step away now, or we can talk when this conversation is respectful. You don't need a courtroom defense for every boundary you have. Your boundary is allowed to exist without their approval. Part 7, stop taking their behavior as a measurement of your worth. This one might be the hardest, because when someone repeatedly criticizes you, dismisses you, lies to you, manipulates you, or makes you feel like you're never enough, eventually you start asking, what is wrong with me? But another person's inability to treat you with love, respect, honesty, or consistency is not a measurement of your worth. Their behavior tells you something about their behavior. It does not tell you who you are. And I want you to start separating those two things. Someone can dislike you. You can still be worthy. Someone can misunderstand you. You can still know yourself. Someone can reject you. You can still choose yourself. Someone can refuse to apologize. You can still heal. And someone can continue being exactly who they've always been without you continuing to be who you had to become around them. And that's the part I really want you to remember. Part 8, you get to protect your peace. So maybe you can't block them, maybe you can't move, maybe you can't change jobs, maybe you still have to co-parent, and then maybe they're still part of your family, maybe you have to see them. Okay, then let's stop measuring your healing by whether they're gone. Instead, start measuring your healing by what happens inside of you when they show up. Do you recover faster? Do you stop explaining yourself? Do you recognize the manipulation sooner? Do you stop chasing their approval? Do you leave the conversation instead of staying to prove your point? Do you stop replaying everything they said? Do you stop wondering how to make them understand? Do you trust yourself more? Because those are signs of healing. Healing isn't always, I never see this person again. Sometimes healing is, I saw them today and they didn't take me away from myself. Like, that's emotional freedom. And if you're in a situation right now where you can't go completely no contact, I want you to know something. You are not failing at healing. You don't have to wait until this person disappears from your life before you start choosing yourself. Start small, notice the patterns, learn your triggers, stop explaining everything, set boundaries based on what you will do. Stop trying to change someone who has shown you that they don't want to change. And most importantly, stop giving someone else responsibility for your peace, because maybe you can't control whether they knock on your door, but you can start deciding whether you're going to open it. And that's where your power begins to come back.